Hey guys, tonight we sneak behind velvet curtains where queens ruled, schemed, and shocked, sometimes all at once. Picture this: torchlight flickering against cold castle stone, the sharp scent of beeswax and iron in the air, and whispers thick enough to hang like fog. You're not just observing tonight. You're stepping into a world where power is worn in the tilt of a jeweled crown. Betrayal is passed along with a goblet of wine, and queenly behavior might just involve poisoning your enemies or waging war from the back of a horse. This isn't your high school textbook history. It's messier, more human, and, honestly, way more fun. You're about to spend the night with some of the most depraved, cunning, and misunderstood queens medieval history ever produced. And I should warn you, your comfy pajamas won't protect you from the political knife fights, midnight escapes, or eyebrow-raising affairs you're about to witness. This won't be all blood and thrones, though. There'll be lavish banquets, scandalous fashion choices, and a few surprisingly tender moments tucked between the intrigue. Still, fair warning, you probably won't survive this royal sleepover without at least one betrayal-induced gasp. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in the echoing halls of European power, where beauty hides blades and status depends more on ruthlessness than nobility. You barely step onto the cold flagstones before you sense it. This place is dangerous. Royalty in the Middle Ages isn't all grace and splendor. It's an ecosystem of gossip, poison, bedroom alliances, and sometimes flaming revenge. Right away, you see that queens weren't just figureheads. They were power players. Some married for strategy, others seduced for leverage. Some killed, some got killed. Many were accused of things we'd now call slander, sexism, or just plain bad luck. But every one of them had a choice to make: bow or bare fangs. And as the centuries turn, the depravity doesn't exactly fade. It just changes shape. At this moment, you're sliding between centuries like veils. No one notices you, yet you're in every room. You watch the game unfold, queen by queen. You'll start with Isabella of France. You might know her nickname, the She-Wolf. Sounds dramatic, right? But wait until you see how she earned it. You're in 14th century England now, and the air stinks of wet wool and suspicion. King Edward II is on the throne, but not for long. His queen, Isabella, is tired of his favoritism, especially toward men like Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser. You sit beside her during court ceremonies, her smile tight, her voice clipped, and behind her calm, you sense it, rage being poured into a very calculated revenge. Isabella doesn't scream. She doesn't throw tantrums. She waits and plots. When she travels to France to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV, she doesn't come back alone. She brings Roger Mortimer, her lover and co-conspirator, and a new kind of fire in her eyes. You can practically see the chessboard lighting up beneath her. She rallies an army, lands in England, dethrones Edward. The king who once dismissed her as a pawn ends up imprisoned, humiliated, and, historians still argue whether this is true, possibly murdered in a particularly gruesome and anatomically specific way. We'll spare you the medieval details. You glance at Isabella and wonder, Is this vengeance, survival, or just politics at its rawest? And you notice something else. Even after her victory, Isabella doesn't get a fairy tale ending. Her lover Mortimer grows power-hungry. Her teenage son Edward III resents being sidelined. Eventually, he stages a coup of his own, executing Mortimer and locking Isabella away in comfortable exile. She dies quietly, far from the battlefield she once conquered. Mainstream historians agree Isabella's rebellion changed the monarchy. Fringe scholars still argue about her motivations. Was she a freedom fighter? A narcissist? A proto-feminist in a chainmail corset? But here's the thing. She survived, and that alone makes her a queen to watch closely. You step away from Isabella's story with a chill brushing your spine. You've only just begun this journey, and already you've witnessed betrayal, seduction, and bloodless conquest. The queens ahead, they're not about to slow down. Next up, you're heading east to the golden halls of Byzantium. Theodora is waiting, and trust me, she's not the type to blush at scandal. You blink, and the chill of England's damp air melts into the sweet heat of Constantinople. Bright mosaics glitter overhead as perfumed winds drift through silk curtains. You've just stepped into the Byzantine Empire, 6th century A.D., and the streets hum with gossip. The city simmers like a jeweled kettle. Golden domes, chariots rattling across the hippodrome, whispers about a girl from the circus who's now Empress Theodora. And not just any empress, one with a past so scandalous it made bishops sweat. You follow her footsteps back to the stage where she once performed risque pantomimes that left little to the imagination. We won't get graphic, but let's just say medieval chroniclers blushed while writing about her. According to the infamous historian Procopius, whose secret history is basically a royal burn book, Theodora's early career included salacious performances with live geese. That part's likely exaggerated, but the gossip stuck like honey on marble. You glance at her again. She's not flinching. She's using every rumor to her advantage. You see her next as a courtesan, yes, a clever one, turning charm into currency, wit into armor. She rises not just through seduction, but through survival. And then somehow she meets Justinian, a legal-minded upstart with ambition hotter than a forge. They fall in love. Or maybe it's mutual calculation. Historians still argue whether it was passion, partnership, or propaganda. Either way, when Justinian becomes emperor, he rewrites Byzantine law just to marry her. Suddenly, Theodora isn't on stage. She's sitting beside the throne, wearing imperial purple and issuing commands like she was born in a palace, not a brothel. She becomes co-ruler in all but name. And here's the twist. She's good at it. She pushes for women's rights, outlawing forced prostitution, expanding divorce protections, even building homes for former sex workers. You're watching someone who weaponizes her past to dismantle a corrupt system. You're impressed, and maybe a little afraid. Then the Nika riots explode. Picture this. Constantinople in flames. Two rival chariot factions, think medieval soccer hooligans with torches, turn the city into a war zone. Justinian panics. He's ready to flee. But Theodora? She stays seated. You're right beside her when she utters the line that practically echoes in stone. Purple is the noblest shroud. Translation? I'd rather die an empress than live a coward. She convinces Justinian to send in the army. 30,000 rebels are slaughtered in the hippodrome. Yes, 30,000. It's a massacre, and it saves the throne. You can't decide if she's courageous or ruthless. Probably both. She continues ruling for decades, co-signing laws, attending councils, silencing enemies. Rumors swirl that she poisoned rivals, that she had spies in every corner of court, that even Justinian feared her. But what you see is something rarer, a woman so determined to rise, she makes history kneel. Even today, historians debate whether Procopius's secret history was truth or slander. Was Theodora the depraved seductress of legend, or a brilliant reformer with a rough start? Maybe she was both. Modern scholars still puzzle over her. Was she a proto-feminist in pearls or a tyrant with lip gloss? Either way, you'd be wise not to underestimate her. You don't survive the Byzantine court without being 5 steps ahead. You leave Theodora in her golden palace, her mosaic eyes watching from high above the basilicas, unblinking. She'll be remembered in stained glass and whispered legends, half saint, half scandal. And now, you're moving again, this time to Italy. But don't get too comfortable. You're walking straight into a royal murder trial. You don't land gently this time. You crash into the pungent heat of Naples, 14th century. The sun here sticks to your skin like guilt, and the courtroom stinks of incense, sweat, and something darker. Fear. The accused? A queen. The victim? Her husband. And you're sitting ringside for one of the most sensational trials in medieval Europe. Enter Queen Joanna I of Naples, beautiful, ambitious, and surrounded by corpses. Let's rewind. Joanna becomes queen at just 16. Her grandfather, King Robert the Wise, dies and leaves her the throne. But this is medieval Europe, and people don't love the idea of a teenage girl ruling anything, especially Naples, a kingdom teetering between elegance and chaos. So, to secure her power, Joanna is married off to her Hungarian cousin Andrew. Now, Andrew, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly a fan favorite. He was loud, crass, and probably a bit power-hungry. The nobles loathed him. The Neapolitans rolled their eyes. And Joanna? Let's just say she didn't rush to make him feel at home. One warm September night, Andrew is invited to a hunting lodge. You trail behind him, hearing every creak of the wooden stairs. Then, silence, followed by a scream. Moments later, Andrew is found hanging by a curtain cord. His body's bruised, his neck twisted. And the worst part? He'd begged Joanna not to let him go that night. You look at her. She's calm. Too calm? Naturally, rumors explode like overripe figs. Did Joanna order the hit? Did she look the other way? Or was it the nobles acting on her behalf? Historians still argue whether she was guilty or just a very convenient scapegoat. Either way, the timing looks bad. Hungary demands answers. A papal investigation is launched, and before long, Joanna is dragged into a full-blown murder trial by the church. You're in the courtroom now, as stone-faced cardinals question her. She pleads innocence, blames court intrigue, insists she loved Andrew, or at least didn't hate him enough to murder him. But behind every word is a woman cornered by history, gender, and geopolitics. She somehow survives the trial, though her reputation doesn't. But here's the thing about Joanna. She doesn't crumble. She doubles down. She marries again, and again, and again. Her second husband, Louis of Taranto, is a warlord in armor and ego. They rule together, but uneasily. You see Joanna watching him in court, her eyes scanning for weakness. When he dies, she keeps going. politics never pause. Her third marriage? To a Castilian prince, a political power play. And the fourth? A French noble, strategically linked to the Avignon papacy. You're dizzy just trying to keep up. She's playing chess with kings and popes and losing pieces fast. Meanwhile, Naples is falling apart. Rival claimants rise. Her own cousin, Louis of Hungary, invades twice. You dodge arrows in the streets as Joanna flees, returns, flees again. It's chaos, palace coups, double crosses, and whispered accusations in every corridor. Yet somehow, she holds on. Until the Black Death sweeps through, and even queens can't negotiate with plague. Joanna survives it, barely, but her power wanes. In her final years, Joanna makes a move so bold it shocks even her allies. She supports the French-backed Pope Clement XI during the Western Schism, splitting Christendom down the middle. Her enemies use this as a pretext. One of them, her adopted heir, Charles of Durazzo, invades. She's captured, imprisoned in a castle, and murdered. Some say she was strangled with a silken cord. Others say she was smothered beneath pillows. No trial, no tomb, just silence. You sit there a moment in the dust of Naples wondering, was Joanna a ruthless ruler or a woman boxed in by brutal expectations? Did she kill Andrew, or was she simply convenient to blame? Her defenders say she was a victim of misogyny. Her critics call her manipulative and vain. The truth? Like all good royal mysteries, it's buried under centuries of bias and bones. But one thing is certain, she ruled in a world where queens were either saints or sinners. And Joanna? She refused to play either part without rewriting the script. You shake off the chill of the dungeon and dust of the courtroom. It's time to ride north, to the wind-swept courts of France and England. Someone is waiting there, half legend, half lioness. Her name is Eleanor. You're jostled into 12th century Aquitaine, and everything smells like crushed herbs, sweat-drenched leather, and the heat of horses. She's not like the others. She doesn't wait in shadows or whisper from behind thrones. No, Eleanor strides into power with her chin up and her eyes sharp. You feel it immediately. This is a woman who commands attention like a storm. Born into wealth and nobility, Eleanor inherits the vast duchy of Aquitaine at just 15. That's no ceremonial title. She controls more land than the King of France himself. You'd think she'd be cautious, diplomatic. Nope. She marries Louis VII, the King of France, and immediately begins stirring things up. You watch her sitting in court, draped in velvet, advising Louis with one hand while ordering the construction of new abbeys with the other. But the match is rocky. Louis is pious, brooding, a monk trapped in a king's crown. Eleanor? She wants music, movement, and control. So, when the Second Crusade kicks off, Eleanor joins him. Literally. In armor. Historians still argue whether she actually led her own contingent of soldiers. Some say it's exaggerated. Others claim she rode with her women dressed as Amazons. You follow behind them across burning sands and hostile territory. It's a PR nightmare. The crusade fails miserably, and Eleanor, already accused of being too headstrong, gets the blame. The marriage, unsurprisingly, dissolves, officially on the grounds of consanguinity, but let's be honest, it was more like incompatibility and intense political eye rolls. Now free, Eleanor doesn't sulk. She marries the future King of England, Henry II, within months. It's bold, maybe reckless, definitely strategic. Between them, they control half of France and all of England. It seems like a royal power couple made in heaven, until it's not. You see cracks almost immediately. Henry is brilliant, fiery, and obsessively controlling. Eleanor, now mother to 8 children, yes, 8, is still politically active and increasingly independent. She starts backing her sons against Henry, that's right. She helps them rebel. You feel the heat of that betrayal. In 1133, the infamous revolt of the sons begins. Its teenage angst meets high treason, with Eleanor orchestrating uprisings while Henry scrambles to maintain control. And when it fails, Henry imprisons her. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. He literally locks her away in castles across England for nearly 16 years. You visit her during those years. She ages, but doesn't soften. Her eyes are always scanning, her posture always queenly. She writes letters, plots, waits, and when Henry dies, finally, her son Richard the Lionheart frees her. Now in her 60s, Eleanor doesn't retire to embroidery. No, she rules as regent while Richard crusades. She arranges marriages, quells rebellions, and even travels across the Alps at 80 to rescue her grandson's throne. Eleanor is unstoppable. Mainstream history hails her as a political genius. Fringe theories suggest she was behind more than a few mysterious deaths in her family, poor Rosamond Clifford for one, found in a bath. Allegedly. Historians still argue whether Eleanor was power-hungry or simply smart enough to play a game men invented and win. Either way, she leaves behind a legacy of queenship that redefined what women could do in medieval Europe. You're still shaking your head as you watch her funeral procession wind through Fontevraud Abbey. Eleanor of Aquitaine doesn't fit in any box. She ruled in a world built against her and still managed to bend it to her will. Her story isn't neat. It's long, tangled, and absolutely riveting. And now the court darkens. Candles flicker in crystal sconces. You step into 16th century France, where power wears perfume and poison hides and silk gloves. Catherine is waiting, and she's already watching you. You step quietly into the court of Catherine de' Medici, and immediately the air changes. It's thick with ambergris, rosewater, and fear. 1,000 candle flames jitter in mirrored halls, and everyone's smiling, but no one's blinking. You're in 16th century France, where daggers hide in lace, and the Queen Mother controls the game board. Catherine isn't born into power. She marries into it. A Medici from Florence, yes, but not a particularly powerful one. Her family is rich, not royal. Still, when she marries Henri II of France, she brings with her a legacy of wealth, strategy, and subtle menace that France isn't quite ready for. Henri, for his part, barely notices her. He's besotted with his longtime mistress, Diane de Poitiers, a woman 20 years his senior, who essentially acts as queen in all but name. Catherine? She plays the long game. She watches, waits, learns every crack in the court's foundation. Then Henri dies. A freak jousting accident, a lance to the eye. Just like that, the queen no one noticed becomes the queen everyone fears. Catherine's young son, Francis II, ascends the throne, but he's weak and sickly. Catherine, acting as regent, begins what will become a near 3-decade reign of influence behind 3 separate kings, Francis, Charles IX, and Henry III. You watch her float through the corridors of the Louvre, whispering in Latin to her astrologers, slipping coded letters to her spies, and wearing black, always black, in mourning for a husband who never loved her. But don't be fooled. Mourning doesn't slow her down. She builds a spy network across Europe, employs Nostradamus, yes, that Nostradamus, as her court astrologer, constructs secret passageways in her castles, and allegedly arms her ladies-in-waiting with poisoned jewelry. You eye a brooch on a duchess and suddenly feel itchy. She also begins shaping the marriages of her children like she's dealing cards at a rigged table. She's behind the notorious marriage of her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, to the Protestant Henry of Navarre, a political move meant to bring peace to France during the Wars of Religion. Spoiler, it does the opposite. The wedding becomes the opening scene of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, one of the most horrific and divisive events in French history. Protestants flood Paris for the royal nuptials. Then, one night, bells toll, doors slam, and the streets run red. Thousands are slaughtered. Historians still argue whether Catherine orchestrated the massacre, panicked into it, or lost control of a plan meant to be more surgical. Some say she ordered it directly. Others argue the Guise family pushed her. A few even believe she was trying to prevent a coup. You wander the Paris streets that morning after, gutted storefronts, silence hanging from windows like laundry. The Louvre looms above, and Catherine stands on a balcony, unmoved. She survives that scandal, and more. Her enemies call her the Italian Jezebel, the Serpent Queen, the Black Widow of France. But even they don't deny her brilliance. One quirky fact: Catherine was obsessed with perfume and astrology. She built one of the first indoor perfume laboratories and surrounded herself with apothecaries. She believed scents could influence moods and maybe fate. Your nose still burns from that almond-sweet, possibly arsenic-laced pomander you accidentally sniffed. She also pioneered fashion, those stiff, black morning gowns. They became all the rage. So did high collars and ruffs, practical when hiding neck bruises or political anxiety. You're starting to see the pattern now. These queens are complex, depraved, yes, but only if you measure them by the narrow lanes history built for women. Catherine didn't burn down France for fun. She did it to hold it together. When she finally dies, quietly in 1589, she leaves behind a kingdom that is, somehow, still intact. Barely, but breathing. You glance back at her one last time. Black veil, sharp eyes, fingers coiled like ivy around a chess piece. She may be gone, but the game continues. And now, the thunder of hooves, war drums, roses crushed underfoot. You're being pulled into the Wars of the Roses where the next queen waits. Not in a throne room, but on a battlefield. The scent hits first. Mud, blood, and blooming roses, not the romantic kind. These ones are stitched to armor, marking allegiance in a civil war that has already swallowed fathers and sons. You're in 15th century England, and the Wars of the Roses are raging. Somewhere between the red banners of Lancaster and the white of York stands a queen with fire in her eyes and a crown that fits like a battle helmet. Margaret of Anjou. You meet her young, fresh off the boat from France, just 15 when she marries King Henry VI, a man more suited to a monastery than a throne. He's pious, timid, and, unfortunately, prone to terrifying episodes of catatonia, like full-on staring at a wall for weeks. type of breakdowns. Not ideal for a king, especially not when the nobility is circling like wolves. And Margaret, she's expected to smile, birth heirs, and keep quiet. You can already guess how that goes. She senses the fragility of Henry's reign, senses the nobles whispering, senses that if she doesn't act, everything, her family, her power, her crown, will be taken from her. So she does something few queens dared to do outright. She takes command. With Henry mentally incapacitated, Margaret effectively rules England. She rallies her allies, makes decisions behind the curtain, and sometimes in front of it. And when Henry recovers and tries to play king again, well, let's just say she doesn't hand the reins back easily. You follow her as she navigates political landmines with all the subtlety of a warhorse. She forms alliances, leverages marriages, and builds armies. But the scandal? That comes with her fierce loyalty to her son, Prince Edward. Here's the issue. Rumors spread like wildfire that Edward isn't Henry's son at all, that he's the product of Margaret's alleged affair with one of her loyal allies. Historians still argue whether this is slander from Yorkist propaganda or something closer to truth. You watch Margaret clutch the boy like a lifeline. Whether or not he's Henry's, he is hers, and she will burn the kingdom to secure his crown. And she nearly does. Margaret wages war across England, literally, not just whispering from behind a veil, but on the battlefield in armor, rallying troops. She leads men, commands, strategizes. She wins battles, loses them, wins again, and she doesn't flinch when the cost is high. At the Battle of Wakefield, she allegedly allows her enemies' heads to be displayed on spikes, with paper crowns nailed to their skulls. That's a power move that echoes in every medieval history classroom to this day. Ruthless? Yes, but maybe necessary in a world that gave her no quarter. Her son Edward grows up on war horses and whispers of destiny. He's raised to rule, but never gets the chance. You stand beside Margaret at the Battle of Tewkesbury, 1471. Her forces are defeated. Her son is captured, then murdered, allegedly in cold blood, right in front of her. It's a devastating moment. Her life's entire purpose ends in a single sword stroke. She's taken prisoner and locked away. She will never see her son's crown, never see peace. After years of imprisonment, she is finally ransomed back to France. Penniless and broken, she dies in quiet obscurity. A woman once called a man's soul in a woman's body, now buried without a kingdom. Even now, historians wrestle with Margaret's legacy. Was she a power-hungry schemer? A grieving mother who refused to let her son be erased? A queen who ruled because no one else could or would? One quirky tidbit: she was reportedly obsessed with chess, often playing for hours in her chamber. A fitting metaphor, really, because she wasn't just a piece on the board. She was the one flipping the table. As you leave the smoky echo of English battlefields, something shifts again. The perfume returns. The whispers sharpen. You're heading into Italy, where family, faith, and poison all taste the same. Lucrezia Borgia is waiting, and her smile might be lethal. You blink again, and now you're somewhere golden, ornate, sinister. Welcome to Renaissance Italy, where the paint is drying on Michelangelo's latest masterpiece. But behind the art and awe lies the oily heartbeat of corruption. You're in Rome, And if you listen closely, you can hear it. The murmur of secrets cloaked in velvet. You've arrived at the heart of the Borgia Empire. And at its center, glittering like a dagger in a goblet of wine, is Lucrezia Borgia. Her name alone feels like a hiss. You watch her enter a Vatican chamber, barely 14, already betrothed. Blonde hair coiled like a crown, eyes sharp despite her age. She's the daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, a cardinal with a scandalous reputation who will soon become Pope Alexander VI. Yeah, the Pope, with children and ambition thick as incense. Here's the thing. Lucrezia didn't ask to be infamous, but from the moment she's born, she's used like currency, married off, passed around, whispered about. Her first engagement is broken off. Her first marriage to a powerful noble is annulled after she allegedly carries on a secret affair with a stable boy. Scandalous? Maybe. But it's hard to know what's truth and what's fiction when every rumor becomes legend. You follow her through a swirl of marriages, betrayals, and accusations. The second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, seems promising. But when the politics shift, when his alliance becomes inconvenient, he ends up strangled on the orders of her brother, Cesare Borgia, the real-life inspiration for Machiavelli's The Prince. Some say Lucrezia tried to protect him. Others say she lured him into a trap. Historians still argue whether she was a victim or an accomplice. What's clear is that she was trapped in the Borgia machine. Her father, the Pope, plays political chess with her body. Her brother Cesare, obsessed with control. Some fringe theories whisper that they were too close, that Lucrezia bore a child by Cesare, or even her father. But hold on. Even at their most salacious, these claims stem more from enemy propaganda than proof. Still, when you live in a palace where guests drink from gilded goblets rumored to contain poison, truth has a hard time standing up straight. And yes, the poison. The Borgia family is infamous for its alleged use of a deadly substance called cantarella, a slow, nearly undetectable poison said to be mixed with wine, administered through hidden compartments in rings or hollowed-out crucifixes. Did Lucrezia wield it? Some say yes. Others claim she only carried the blame when men died inconveniently. One peculiar fact? A surviving letter from her reveals Lucrezia was deeply interested in herbal remedies and perfumes. She had a knack for concoctions. Whether she used them to heal or harm? Well, that depends on who's telling the story. Eventually, she escapes Rome. Sort of. Her third marriage is to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara. And oddly enough, this one works. Maybe not in the storybook sense, but it lasts. She becomes Duchess of Ferrara, a respected patron of the arts, a savvy administrator, and mother to several children. You walk with her through her gardens now, past fountains and frescoes, and you wonder, is this peace? She ages gracefully, finally untethered from her family's toxicity. She builds libraries, sponsors poets, protects convents. When she dies in childbirth at just 39, even her enemies write eulogies filled with respect. So, was Lucrezia a scheming temptress, a poisoner, a femme fatale, or was she simply a girl raised in a snake pit, taught to smile while others twisted daggers behind their backs? Mainstream history is finally starting to give her some credit. She wasn't a villain, just a survivor wrapped in the same silk and blood as her brothers, but trying to carve out a different ending. You turn away from Ferrara as dusk falls, the sun casting long shadows over her portrait. Lucrezia gazes back at you, not guilty, not innocent, just human. Your next stop is dustier, bloodier, and somehow even more unstable. You're going to medieval Spain, where a queen named Urraca isn't interested in diplomacy. She wants war. The ground beneath your feet is dry, cracked, and sun-blasted. You're not in the familiar gray haze of England or the perfume-choked corridors of Rome anymore. This is medieval Spain, harsh, volatile, and humming with a clang of sword against shield. You squint against the sunlight and catch sight of a woman astride a horse, her cloak snapping in the wind, her crown gleaming like a challenge. Urraca of Leon and Castile has arrived, and she is not here to smile for portraits. Born in 1079, Urraca is the eldest daughter of Alfonso III of Leon and Castile, one of the most powerful kings in Christian Spain during the Reconquista. When her only brother dies young in battle, Urraca suddenly becomes heir to one of the most expansive kingdoms in Europe. But don't start imagining parades and coronation cakes. From the moment she ascends the throne in 1109, Urraca is treated less like a queen and more like a pawn surrounded by wolves. She's the first ruling queen of Leon Castile in her own right, and no one is ready for that. To strengthen her claim, her nobles marry her off to Alfonso I of Aragon, a warrior king with a reputation for brutality and absolutely no interest in sharing power. The marriage, as you might guess, goes down in flames. Loudly, almost immediately, they begin fighting, not just in bed, but on the battlefield. Yes, the two of them actually wage war on each other while technically still married. You duck under a flying javelin as Urraca raises an army to defend her territory against her own husband. It's the kind of royal spat that turns into full-scale civil war. Historians still argue whether their marriage was ever consummated. Some records say it was. Others hint that Urraca fled her wedding night. Either way, she denounces the union publicly and excommunicates Alfonso. You don't see that every day. A queen excommunicating a king like she's canceling a subscription, and it only gets messier. Her own son, from a previous marriage, young Alfonso Raimundez, is used against her. Some of her nobles decide they'd rather have a male ruler and start propping him up as king while Urraca is very much still alive and ruling. Imagine being in your 30s and having to fend off your toddler's claim to your own throne. Medieval parenting, am I right? You trail Urraca through skirmishes and sieges. Her court becomes a battlefield of alliances and betrayals. At one point, she's captured by her husband, who supposedly beats her in public. Another time, she's besieged in her own castle, only to escape and retake power days later. She doesn't give up, she doesn't back down, and, most striking of all, she never remarries. Not once after that disaster of a first marriage. She rules alone, a scandalous, near unheard of thing for a queen of her time. There are moments of strange calm. She negotiates treaties, funds churches, corresponds with popes. But every lull feels like a breath before another storm. You realize Urraca isn't interested in being liked. She's interested in being feared, respected, and obeyed. One quirky fact? She was known to sign official documents with the Latin phrase Urraca, de gratia regina. Urraca, queen by the grace of God. But she also occasionally included titles like Empress of all Spain, even though no one officially gave her that title. She just took it. You have to respect the confidence. And here's the thing. She holds the throne until her death in 1126. Despite rebellions, war, slander, and constant attempts to strip her power, she never lets go. She dies in office, still queen. Was she depraved? Depends who you ask. To her enemies, she was unstable, violent, power-hungry. To modern historians, she's a rare example of a medieval woman who didn't just survive politics. She weaponized them. Historians still debate whether her violent reign was inevitable or the result of a system that never truly accepted a woman's rule. You ride away from her court with dust in your mouth and admiration in your gut. She was wild, complicated, and not especially queenly by the standards of her day, but she was sovereign on her own terms. Next, you're trading dust for embroidery and battle cries for political finesse. You're off to France again, where a duchess marries not one but two French kings, yet always manages to keep her own pen sharp and her borders well guarded. Her name is Anne of Brittany, and she's got contracts sharper than swords. Now you're walking into a court where every thread of tapestry has been stitched with caution, and even the flower arrangements feel politically calculated. Welcome to 15th century France, and welcome to the world of Anne of Brittany, a queen who didn't need bloodshed to wield power. She just needed contracts, lots of them. At first glance, Anne seems like a softer figure than the queens you've met so far. No poison rings, no battlefield speeches. But don't be fooled. She wasn't depraved in the blood and steel sense. Her depravity, if you can even call it that, came wrapped in diplomacy and ironclad self-interest. Born in 1477, Anne becomes Duchess of Brittany at age 11 after her father dies. That alone is historic. She inherits rule of an independent duchy in a time when most young girls inherit a dowry and a prayer. Anne Brittany? It's not just a seaside postcard. It's a prize surrounded by sharks. France wants it. England wouldn't mind it. The Holy Roman Empire is glancing sideways at it. And at the center of that political tug-of-war, a preteen girl with a coronet slipping over her ears. Anne's guardians arrange a marriage by proxy to Maximilian of Austria, future Holy Roman Emperor. Romantic, right? Not really. The wedding happens with Maximilian nowhere in sight, just a stand-in groom and a signed agreement. The French king, Charles V, is livid. Why? Because that marriage means Brittany could fall under imperial control, and that's a threat to France's unity. So what does Charles do? He invades, marches troops into Anne's duchy, and forces her to annul the marriage she never physically consummated. Then, brace yourself, he marries her himself. That's right. At just 14, Anne is married to her enemy, the king who conquered her homeland. You sit beside her during the wedding feast. Her face is unreadable. Her gown is flawless. And somewhere, behind the facade, she's filing this entire experience away for later. She knows the rules, and she's already rewriting them. Anne and Charles have no surviving sons. So, when Charles dies after a bizarre accident involving a doorframe, no joke, she suddenly becomes a very eligible widow and a duchess again. Technically free. And guess what? She negotiates her next marriage contract personally. Anne agrees to marry Charles's successor, Louis XIV, but with very strict conditions. Like what? Oh, just ensuring Brittany remains semi-independent, that her daughter from her first marriage retains inheritance rights, and that no woman can inherit the unified French and Breton crowns unless she says so. You're seeing a pattern. Anne of Brittany never picks up a sword, but she outmaneuvers kings by thinking 5 steps ahead and writing it down in triplicate. You follow her through court life, where she carefully balances her role as French queen with her loyalty to her Breton roots. She refuses to speak French at home. She wears Breton fashions. She funds Breton churches and artists. She creates a dual identity, part queen consort, part duchess monarch, and neither role swallows the other. One quirky fact: Anne was obsessed with books, especially lavishly illuminated manuscripts. She commissioned one of the most beautiful books of hours ever made. Historians have noted she often used books not just for piety, but to communicate her political power through symbolism. Think Renaissance PR. She also introduced the ermine as a royal symbol. Clean, elegant, but also fierce. Legend said the ermine would rather die than dirty its white coat. That's Anne. Pristine surface, ruthless instincts. Did she poison anyone? No. Did she ride into battle? Not once. But was she depraved in the eyes of male courtiers? Probably. For a woman to wrestle kings into legal submission and defend her duchy with ink instead of blood, that was practically heresy. She dies at 36 after 14 pregnancies and 2 marriages. But she never lets go of Brittany. Even in death, she requests to be buried in 2 places, her body in Saint-Denis beside the French kings, her heart in Nantes, forever loyal to her Breton people. Historians still debate whether Anne delayed the inevitable or saved Brittany's soul. But one thing's certain: she was the last ruler to keep it sovereign. No queen after her would be allowed that much autonomy. You step away from her court as her signature is etched onto parchment once again, sealing the future with wax and willpower. No blood, no blade, just one woman's refusal to vanish. Next, you're off to Eastern Europe. The halls are colder, the politics meaner, and the next queen? She marries for murder, literally. Say hello to Olga of Kiev. Now the wind howls, not a courtly breeze, but a punishing chill that cuts through your cloak and stiffens your breath. You've arrived in the 10th century, in the raw, bone-cold wilds of Kievan Rus, the early roots of what would become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. There are no velvet halls here, just timber strongholds, wolves at the tree line, and a queen so fierce she makes the others look like milkmaids. This is Olga of Kiev, and she doesn't just rule. She burns revenge into the shape of an empire. You meet her first as a wife. She's married to Prince Igor I of Kiev, a ruler with decent standing but poor instincts. One day, while collecting tribute from the Drevlians, a neighboring tribe with a long history of grumbling, he pushes his luck, tries to extort them twice. Bad idea. They tie his legs to 2 bent trees and rip him in half. Graphic? Yes, but it's also your origin point for one of the coldest revenge stories in all of history. Now, Olga is a widow, and the Drevlians, ever the opportunists, think, well, Igor's dead. Maybe we can marry Olga to our prince and rule Kiev through her. Cute idea, until their envoys arrive. You're standing beside Olga when they present their offer. She smiles, politely, then tells them, "You deserve great honor for your proposal. Tomorrow I'll give you a public escort through the city." She does, but that Escort is a trench where the messengers are buried alive. Still not satisfied, she sends word to the Drevlians. Send your noblest men to continue negotiations. They do. She invites them to bathe first, sends them to a bathhouse. And when they're all inside, she sets it on fire. That's 2 full diplomatic missions wiped out. With flair. Historians still argue whether Olga was already plotting total destruction or escalating step by step. But you see her calm as a lake even as she gathers her army and marches on the Drevlian capital. They panic, beg for mercy. Olga agrees if they provide 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from every household. A bizarre ask, right? Then she ties sulfur-soaked cloth to their legs and sets them alight. The birds fly home. The entire city burns from within, roofs catching fire as the panicked animals return to their nests. You're not blinking anymore. You're just watching flames. Some sources call her a monster. Others call her a genius. Either way, she emerges as the undisputed ruler of Kievan Rus. And she rules well, cleverly reorganizing tax systems, strengthening defenses, and centralizing royal power. She becomes a master of statecraft in an age when queens were expected to shut up and remarry. She never does. One strange twist? Olga converts to Christianity, possibly to align Kievan Rus more closely with Byzantium. She visits Constantinople, dazzles Emperor Constantine VII, and is baptized there. Some stories claim he proposed marriage. She refused, saying, "I am your daughter now in Christ." A political and theological power move. Her Christian piety becomes famous, so much so that centuries later, the Orthodox Church canonizes her as a saint. Yes, a woman who burned cities and buried ambassadors becomes Saint Olga. You try to reconcile the 2 images, the young widow burning pigeons, and the royal matron receiving sacraments in a golden cathedral. But that's Olga. Brutality and belief in equal measure. Historians still debate her motivations. Was her conversion genuine or just diplomatic theater? Did she spare her son's enemies to avoid further bloodshed, or because she needed time to consolidate power? One quirky detail: Olga was one of the first women in Eastern Europe to appear on currency, centuries before most Western queens even appeared in stained glass. She dies peacefully in 969. Her son, Sviatoslav, inheriting the throne she carved with fire. He won't convert to Christianity, but her grandson will, Vladimir the Great, who Christianizes all of Kievan Rus. So, yes, her legacy is holy, but also haunted. You leave her grave in Kiev beneath frost-laced trees, hearing the echo of sparrows above, wings still smoking from history. Now, your journey carries you to Northern Europe, where the next queen doesn't burn cities. She controls Baltic trade, manipulates kings like chess pieces, and earns the nickname the Lady King. Meet Margaret I of Denmark, and keep your voice down. She's listening. The wind sharpens now, curling off the gray waves of the Baltic Sea, salt stinging your eyes. You're in 14th century Scandinavia, a land of craggy coastlines, Viking bones buried under stone churches, and something colder than the weather, power games that span oceans. At the center of it all stands a woman the records call a queen, but the people call the Lady King. This is Margaret I of Denmark, and she doesn't just rule kingdoms, she merges them. You meet her as a princess, the youngest daughter of King Valdemar IV of Denmark. She's just 10 when she's married off to King Haakon VI of Norway. You expect a quiet royal life of embroidery and dowry wrangling, but Margaret, she's got other plans. Her husband's reign is shaky. Norway is scattered, unstable, and constantly under pressure from Sweden and German traitors. But Margaret watches, learns, and begins working behind the scenes. When her father dies in 1375, she makes a stunning move. She engineers the election of her 5-year-old son Olaf as King of Denmark. Yes, she installs a toddler on the throne. Why? Because she knows that if Olaf is king, she holds the reins. You watch her glide through councils and courtrooms wrapped in heavy fur and heavier intentions. Denmark bends, then Norway. She becomes regent in both realms after Olaf dies young, and with the careful patience of someone playing the longest game in Europe, she sets her eyes on Sweden. The Swedes? They aren't eager to join the club, so Margaret does what few rulers of her time could even dream of. She invades, defeats their king in battle, and consolidates Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under her rule in what becomes the Kalmar Union, a triple crown resting on her head. The kicker? She never officially calls herself Queen of the Union. Instead, she takes the gender-bending title All-Powerful Lady and Mistress of the Kingdom, a phrase that says, "I run this show with maximum chill." Historians still debate whether her control was absolute or more of a balancing act between powerful noble factions. But from what you're seeing, Margaret's grip is anything but loose. She abolishes royal councils, centralizes power, and strengthens the crown. And she does it all without a husband, without a son, and without pretending to be anyone's puppet. You step into her court, stone walls, carved lions, guards that eye you like meat. Margaret sits at the head of a long table, discussing tariffs, naval logistics, and royal marriages in Latin. She's multilingual, ferociously well-read, and absolutely merciless in negotiations. German merchants from the Hanseatic League learn quickly. Cross her, and your entire port loses trading rights. Still think this is just a nice lady in a crown? One quirky fact: Margaret was reportedly obsessed with justice and cleanliness. Her laws emphasized the prosecution of corrupt officials, and her kitchens were known for being spotless to the point of obsession. A bureaucratic neat freak in an age of plague and war? Bold. And that brings us to her most controversial move, her heir. Since Olaf died, Margaret needs a successor. Instead of a biological child, she adopts her great-nephew Eric of Pomerania, a distant relation raised under her instruction. But as Eric ages, he begins making decisions without her, and not good ones. Taxes rise, nobles grumble. War threatens the Union's fragile balance. Margaret reins him in, hard. Some scholars argue she never truly let Eric rule. Others say he resented her grip and began unraveling her legacy in her final years. You watch them dine together in silence. He broods. She calculates. Even in her 50s, she radiates command. Then comes her final journey. In 1412, Margaret travels to negotiate peace between Denmark and the German-controlled city of Schleswig. On the voyage, she falls ill, possibly from the plague, and dies aboard her ship, anchored off the port of Flensburg. Her death sends ripples across Europe. No other queen had done what she did. United 3 kingdoms, ruled them for decades, and left behind a vision of Scandinavian unity that would echo for centuries. Her tomb is magnificent, but her real monument is strategic. The Kalmar Union lasts over a century. Not bad for a woman they refused to call king out loud, but whispered it behind closed doors. Was she depraved? Hardly. But to the men she outmaneuvered, outlasted, and outclassed, she might as well have been. Power in a woman's hands always looks a little sinister when you're the one losing grip. You leave her court sailing north, past pine forests and icy fjords, into darker territory. Next up is a queen with her own body count. But this time, it's not war or politics. It's personal. You're about to meet Elizabeth Bathory, and you might want to bring garlic. Now the mist gets thicker. It clings to your clothes and curls around your ankles like it's alive. You've entered early 17th century Hungary, and the forest ahead is no fairy tale. It's a labyrinth of superstition, noble decay, and some say blood. You're approaching Kashtit's castle, a lonely fortress perched on a hill where the torches never quite warm the stone. Inside waits a woman whose name has bled into legend, Elizabeth Bathory, often called the Blood Countess. You've heard the stories, the whispered horror, that she bathed in virgin's blood, that her screams echoed into the Carpathian pines, that she kept a ledger of every soul she tortured. But before the myths consume her, you need to meet the actual woman, because, as with every queen in this journey, reality is far more tangled than rumor. Elizabeth is born in 1560 into unimaginable privilege. She's a Bathory, one of the most powerful families in Hungary, with connections to princes, bishops, and even royalty. She grows up fluent in Latin, German, and Hungarian. You peek into her childhood studies, astronomy, law, poetry. But outside the classroom, feudal Hungary is in turmoil. The Ottomans press in from the south, nobles scheme in every direction, and war is never far. At 15, she's married off to Ferenc Nadasdy, a soldier nicknamed the Black Knight of Hungary. Ferenc spends most of his life on the battlefield, while Elizabeth manages the family estates. And she's good at it, ruthlessly efficient, running 10 castles and hundreds of servants. She handles legal disputes, doles out punishment, even lends money to other nobles. In the male world of Hungarian power, she thrives as an administrator. But here's where things get dark and weird and very, very muddy. After Ferenc dies in 1604, Elizabeth is widowed at 44, wealthy, powerful, and suddenly vulnerable. That's when rumors begin to swirl. Young servant girls go missing. Villagers whisper about screams at night. And then come the accusations that Elizabeth tortures girls, murders them, and, most infamously, bathes in their blood to stay young. You walk through the castle halls, cold, bare, and yet there's a feeling of pressure in the air, like something unseen pressing against your spine. Her alleged methods? Chilling, beatings, burning, mutilation. Some say she sewed mouths shut. Others claim she drove needles under fingernails. And yes, the blood-bathing myth persists, even though modern historians consider it probably invented after her arrest to sensationalize her crimes. Which brings us to the trial, if you can call it that. In 1610, the Hungarian crown sends Count Georgi Thurzo to investigate. He storms her castle and allegedly finds mutilated bodies, some dead, some still dying. Elizabeth is placed under house arrest immediately, but, and this is important, she is never officially tried or convicted. Why? Because she's too powerful. A trial would mean scandal. So instead, her alleged accomplices are tortured, interrogated, and executed. Elizabeth is walled up inside a chamber in her castle with only a small opening for food. She dies 4 years later, in 1614. Here's where historians start arguing. A lot. Some say Elizabeth was a sadistic serial killer, guilty of torturing over 600 victims, a number allegedly recorded in a mysterious ledger. Others say she was a target of political conspiracy, framed by those who wanted her land, money, and influence. Hungary, at the time, was deeply patriarchal. A wealthy, unmarried woman who refused to remarry and held real power? Threatening. Modern scholars debate whether her crimes were exaggerated or invented entirely. There's little physical evidence. Many testimonies were given under torture. Some claim the blood-bathing rumor only surfaced after her death, possibly added by Jesuit writers to stoke fear and sell books. So, what do we know for sure? Elizabeth was a brilliant, educated noblewoman who lived in a brutal era where life was cheap and justice was murky. She likely punished her servants violently, perhaps cruelly, but whether she was a monstrous killer or the victim of a smear campaign remains open to interpretation. And that's the disturbing part. You want clean lines, good, evil, guilty, innocent, but history never plays along. Not here. Not with her. One peculiar fact? Before her arrest, Elizabeth had been petitioning the crown for repayment of loans she made to the royal family. Some historians suggest that this, more than anything, may have accelerated her downfall. Powerful women with ledgers are rarely beloved. You leave Cachtis Castle as a storm brews. The trees shift. Something watches from the shadows. Maybe guilt. Maybe legend. Maybe both. Your next destination smells of coal smoke and court ink. You're heading to England again, this time to meet a queen who ruled alone, never married, and outwitted every suitor and assassin sent her way. Elizabeth Vara is waiting, and she's not wearing white for purity. She's wearing it because it looks absolutely lethal in candlelight. Now you hear it. The click of heels on polished stone, the rustle of stiff lace, the hiss of whispered secrets riding candlelight through corridors. You're in 16th century England, and this isn't the murky medieval past anymore. This is the age of tension, intrigue, and Elizabeth of ours, the last of the Tudors, and a queen who turned virginity into political power and solitude into a throne-room fortress. You catch her first in a portrait, red hair flaming like a torch, skin powdered ghost pale, eyes cold and amused, hand resting possessively on a globe. She is not married, not planning to be, and certainly not stepping aside. She is the Virgin Queen, but don't let the nickname fool you. There's nothing passive or chaste about the way she rules. Elizabeth is born into chaos in 1533, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, who loses her head, literally, before Elizabeth is even 3. Declared illegitimate, shuttled between households and left out of succession battles, Elizabeth spends her youth in a tightrope walk of danger and intellect. But she survives. She survives the execution of her mother, the reign of her sickly brother Edward, the paranoia of her Catholic half-sister Mary I, and even her own arrest under suspicion of rebellion. While imprisoned in the Tower of London, She allegedly carves the Latin phrase, much suspected by me, nothing proved can be, into a window frame. You're already seeing the pattern. Survive first, reign later. When she finally ascends the throne in 1558, England is divided, poor, and politically isolated. But Elizabeth walks into power like she's been waiting her whole life. And maybe she has. From the moment the crown hits her head, she rewrites the expectations of monarchy. One crown, one ruler, no king needed. Her refusal to marry? Scandalous, strategic, and absolutely brilliant. Every royal house in Europe tries to woo her, France, Spain, Austria. She entertains them all like a courtesan at a masquerade, extracting alliances, stalling invasions, and trading flirtation for diplomacy. She never says yes. She never says no. She rules the proposal process itself. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth had romantic relationships at all. The most infamous possibility, Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and lifelong favorite. Some suspect a secret love affair. Others claim their bond was intimate but chaste. Regardless, she never marries him, especially after his wife turns up dead under suspicious circumstances at the bottom of a staircase. Even when alone, she isn't powerless. In fact, she weaponizes solitude. She surrounds herself with brilliant advisors, William Cecil, Francis Walsingham, Sir Walter Raleigh, and controls court like a stage manager controls a play. You watch her walk the palace halls, flanked by guards, a dozen languages swimming in her head, 3 separate assassination plots unfolding around her. She's playing the world's most dangerous game, and she's winning. You hear the thunder of cannons in 1588? The Spanish Armada is approaching. Spain, the most powerful Catholic empire in the world, has had enough of her Protestant defiance. But Elizabeth doesn't run. Instead, she dons armor, mounts a white horse, and rides out to address her troops at Tilbury. You hear her voice over the roar of soldiers. I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. And a king of England, too. The Armada is shattered by storms and English fire. The nation cheers. Elizabeth grows stronger. But her reign isn't without darkness. You stand beside her as she signs death warrants, including for her cousin and rival, Mary, Queen of Scots. For years, Elizabeth kept Mary imprisoned, another queen, another threat, another pawn in the game of dynastic chess. But when Mary's role in plots against the crown becomes undeniable, Elizabeth signs the order, then promptly regrets it, publicly mourns it, but still, the blade falls. She cultivates an image of grace and mercy, but she is absolutely capable of political brutality. She executes Catholic priests, tortures spies, and crushes Irish resistance with ferocity. Was she depraved? No, but she wasn't soft either. She understood power, and she used it, calculated, clean, and controlled. One quirky fact, Elizabeth allegedly kept over 80 wigs, wore lead-based makeup that slowly poisoned her, and was obsessed with preserving an illusion of eternal youth. By the end of her life, she barely allowed anyone to see her without her armor of fashion, powdered face, and elaborate ruffs. Her final years are lonely. All her closest friends are dead. She paces the halls at night, murmuring to herself, refusing food, refusing to rest. She dies in 1603, after a 44-year reign, the longest of any Tudor. She names no heir, leaves no child. But she leaves an empire, one that will dominate the world for centuries. You step away from her golden tomb in Westminster Abbey, and for just a moment you think you see her smirk, not kindly, but knowingly. Next, you're heading somewhere stranger, somewhere colder. You're about to meet a woman who shattered tradition, changed fashion, and might have staged her husband's death just to seize the crown. Yes, Catherine the Great is ready for her close-up. The snow crunches underfoot now. Thick flakes fall like white ash from a sky that feels too wide, too quiet. You're in 18th century Russia, a land of opulence and ice, where palaces sparkle like frozen thunderclouds and revolutions simmer beneath brocade and fur. Here, surrounded by silver birch trees and silent guards, rises Catherine the Great, a woman who didn't just rule an empire, she took it. You first meet her as Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, a minor German princess with royal blood and little else. At 14, she's summoned to the Russian court to marry Peter III, heir to the Romanov throne. You'd think she'd be intimidated by the scale of it all, the language, the winters, the cutthroat politics, but she's not. She studies Russian in secret, reads Orthodox texts, wins over courtiers, and when the time comes, she converts, changes her name to Catherine, and marries Peter. The marriage? A mess. Peter is immature, erratic, obsessed with toy soldiers, and reportedly incapable or uninterested in producing an heir. Catherine, on the other hand, is brilliant. She reads Enlightenment philosophy, corresponds with Voltaire, keeps a private library that would put most universities to shame. And while Peter drinks, plays dress-up, and alienates every advisor within 10 feet, Catherine plots. In 1762, after Peter finally becomes Tsar and immediately makes enemies of the church, the army, and half the nobility, Catherine strikes. With the help of her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his loyal troops, she stages a bloodless coup. Peter is arrested and conveniently dies soon after, officially of hemorrhoidal colic. But everyone knows better. Historians still argue whether Catherine ordered his murder, tolerated it, or simply looked the other way. But by the time the dust settles, she is Empress of Russia, not consort, not regent, Empress. And then she governs like fire. You walk through her reign like strolling through a museum being built in real time. Catherine reforms education, establishes the Smolny Institute, the first state-financed higher education institution for women in Europe, rewrites law codes, and modernizes the court. She expands Russia's borders dramatically, crushing rebellions, annexing Crimea, and waging successful wars against the Ottoman Empire and Poland. She makes Russia a true European superpower, and she does it with style. You see her at court, dressed in military uniform for state portraits, not dresses, not corsets. She embodies her empire quite literally. Catherine writes plays, pens memoirs, and even dabbles in philosophy, creating a uniquely Russian brand of enlightened absolutism, all while dancing around conservative backlash and palace intrigue. One mainstream fact? Catherine abolished the use of torture in many civil cases and corresponded for decades with Diderot, Voltaire, and other Enlightenment thinkers, even inviting Diderot to her court. But not everything about her reign is pure polish and progress. A massive peasant uprising, Pugachev's rebellion, explodes in 1773, challenging Catherine's reforms and threatening her throne. In response, she cracks down hard, strengthening the nobility's grip on serfs and intensifying the very inequalities she once promised to soften. Was she progressive? Yes. Was she ruthless? Also yes. And then there's the legend. You know the one. You tiptoe around it, but let's clear the air. No, Catherine did not die having intimate relations with a horse. That myth, wild, graphic, and grotesquely misogynistic, surfaced long after her death, a smear campaign designed to undermine a powerful woman by attacking her sexuality. What is true? Catherine had many lovers, some younger, some significantly so. But these weren't random flings. They were often trusted advisors, military commanders, and diplomats. Her relationships blurred the lines between bedroom and boardroom, but she remained firmly in control. One fringe tidbit: Catherine commissioned a secret erotic cabinet filled with risque art and furniture, likely destroyed after her death. Historians still debate its existence, but the rumors have become part of her shadowy legend. Still, despite the whispers, Catherine kept her grip on power until her death in 1796. She wasn't overthrown. She wasn't poisoned. She wasn't pushed aside. She died in her bed, aged 67, still holding a pen, still planning the future of the empire. You walk slowly past the Winter Palace, where she ruled for over 3 decades. The snow quiets now, muffling the stories, the scandals, the contradictions. Catherine wasn't just great because of territory, art, or governance. She was great because she broke the mold, survived the storm, and made the world speak her name in awe, even when it whispered it through clenched teeth. And now, only one name remains, one more queen to meet. But she's not remembered for war or books or murder. She's remembered for how she ended, not how she lived. Your final destination? France. The guillotine is sharp. The crowds are louder than ever. Marie Antoinette awaits. The crowds are already gathering when you arrive. Paris is tense, electric, like a wire stretched too tight. You're no longer in medieval shadow or imperial splendor. You're in the late 18th century, and revolution is boiling over. The banners of monarchy flutter weakly above the chaos, and the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and something sharper: anger. At the heart of it all stands Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, icon of excess, and the final act in your journey. You first see her as a child, Maria Antonia of Austria, born into the massive Habsburg dynasty. She's the 15th of 16 children, a pawn in political alliances from the start. At 14, she's shipped off to Versailles to marry the awkward, indecisive Dauphin Louis, future Louis XVI. It's a marriage of diplomacy, not affection, and you can feel her isolation immediately. Versailles is cold, even when golden. The etiquette is crushing. Every glance is judged. Marie Antoinette, foreign, untrained, and a teenager, is expected to become a perfect French queen overnight. Instead, she makes mistakes. And in the powdered world of Versailles, mistakes are fatal. At first, the French people adore her. She's pretty, youthful, and full of charm. But she struggles to produce an heir, something the court does not forgive lightly. When she finally gives birth to a daughter, then a son, the damage is already done. Rumors bloom like mold in the walls of the palace. She's cold. She's spending too much. She's influencing the king. She's not really French. You follow her through the gilded halls of the Petit Trianon, a private chateau, where she creates a fantasy world of rural simplicity, complete with a fake farm and milkmaids in silk. To her, it's an escape. To the people starving in the streets, it looks like mockery. And then there's that quote, the most famous word she likely never said. Let them eat cake. There's no evidence she uttered it. The line appears in Rousseau's writings years before she was even queen. But once the mobs believe it, it doesn't matter. It becomes her legacy, true or not. Historians still argue whether Marie Antoinette was a genuine villain or a scapegoat, a pretty foreign face on which to hang the sins of a bloated monarchy. But the French Revolution doesn't care about nuance. It wants blood. The Bastille falls in 1789. The royal family is forced to Paris. They try to escape. You watch the failed flight to Varennes, the disguise, the slow unraveling of royal power. Marie Antoinette is no longer a queen. She's a prisoner. She writes letters. She weeps for her children. She tries to play politics from her cell, communicating in code, hoping Austria or England will intervene. But the world is changing too fast. The revolution devours moderates and monarchs alike. Louis XVI is tried, convicted, and executed. 9 months later, it's her turn. The crowd roars as she's marched to the guillotine, not in a royal carriage, but in an open cart. Her once elaborate hair cut short, her white shift rustling like a flag of surrender. One last note of irony. On her way to the scaffold, she steps on her executioner's foot and apologizes. "Pardon me, sir, I didn't do it on purpose." It's the last thing she ever says. She is 38 years old. You want her story to be neater, clearer, but it isn't. She wasn't Catherine the Great, commanding empires. She wasn't Elizabeth Northorn, dancing alone in a sea of danger. Marie Antoinette was born into a collapsing world, never trained to survive its fall. Was she frivolous? Yes. Detached? Probably. But monstrous? That's harder to say. One fringe detail. In recent years, her letters to Count Axel von Fersen, a Swedish diplomat rumored to be her lover, have been reanalyzed with advanced technology. Portions once redacted by censors now reveal emotional, possibly romantic phrases, suggesting a deep and intimate bond, even if unconsummated. And so she passes not as a demon, but as a human being trapped in history's most unforgiving machinery. You step back from the scaffold, the blade gleams, the roar of the crowd fades, and with that, your journey through depraved queens, deadly courts, and dangerous crowns comes to an end. But don't leave just yet. Let's slow everything down. The guillotine falls quiet now. The torches gutter, the palace doors close, and you, so recently caught in the whirlwind of ambition, betrayal, elegance, and blood, can finally let your shoulders relax. The queens you've walked beside tonight, some ruled through fear, others through ink, some through fire, others by simply refusing to leave. You've wandered across empires, stood in frost-laced cathedrals, listened to lovers whisper behind veils, and watched as steel met neck, contract met seal, and rebellion met silence. History rarely hands us clean narratives. It prefers contradictions. And queens, perhaps more than any other figures, are layered contradictions in velvet and iron. They're called depraved when they resist, cold when they lead, heartless when they punish, and weak when they don't. Some of them leaned into that role. Others tried to escape it. None of them made it out untouched. Now, As the last of the candlelight flickers against castle walls that no longer stand, you can breathe easy. The ghosts are behind you. The journey has quieted. And what remains is not horror, but awe. So rest now. Let your mind drift from marble tombs to parchment scrolls to the hush of silk on stone. History sleeps too sometimes, and tonight it leaves you with the echo of a crown being set down, just softly enough to let dreams slip in. Good night.